Intersectional community-led biodiversity conservation is an approach to environmental protection that empowers local communities to become stewards of their land. This method recognizes the crucial role indigenous people and local communities play in conserving biodiversity, given their deep knowledge and connection to the environment. While this approach has existed for generations, it's gaining traction due to the growing urgency of the climate crisis. The concept isn't new to Javie Barcinal, a 2024 Global Landscape Forum mountain restoration steward from Antique in the Philippines.
The work in community-led conservation since maybe I was 17. Started 2018, started as a volunteer. And then after that, I founded our organization, Dulungan Youth, in 2019. So Dulungan Youth is coined or named from the local name of the Rufous-headed Hornbill, which is known locally as the Dulungan.
The Rufous-headed Hornbill, or Dulungan as it's known locally, is a symbol of Antique's rich biodiversity. This magnificent bird with its sleek black plumage, creamy tail, and the vibrant red and orange cascade faces a critical fight for survival. Habitat loss due to deforestation and hunting has pushed the Dulungan to the brink of extinction, with only an estimated 1,500 to 4,000 individuals remaining. But Javie believes that the fate of the Rufous-headed Hornbill and the rich biodiversity of Antique are deeply intertwined within the well-being of local communities and the broader environmental health of his beloved province.
The organization is mostly focused on community and youth empowerment through educational awareness initiatives and also capacity development. And our main focus right now is to make locals, especially young people, become frontliners, or how do I say it? Like really advocate for the importance of local leadership and at the same time a more inclusive paradigms in terms of conservation for the Rufous-headed Hornbill and at the same time the ridge to reef biodiversity of our home province, which is Antique.
Javie developed a passion for conservation after spending a lot of time with his grandfather. He would listen intently to stories about the folklore and mythology surrounding the area. These narratives were orally passed down from generation to generation and made him rethink about his connection to nature.
Growing up with stories that my grandfather used to tell me about the mythology and also the folklore of our own province, like the legend of the mountain, like the story, its mythology, and also the different beings, the more than human beings that it's really like living there. So that's something that really influenced me at a young age. And at the same time, it's really that direct connection, or like I've lived in Antique since I was young. Most of my life I lived here. So it's really innate, or it's really natural in terms of my connection with the land, in terms of my relationship with its landscapes.
The land he's referring to is considered one of the most sacred places in the Visayas region since ancient times. According to the legend, it was the home of Sidapa's ancient sacred tree and the Visayan god of death, and other deities who paid homage to the mountain before relocating to other places.
So in my house, the overviewing view is the highest mountain peak in the Central Panay mountain range. It's a group of mountain ridges here in our region, in Panay Island. That's where Antique is. And the highest peak is Mount Majaas. So most of our conservation initiatives are situated there. And also, it's also a sanctuary for the Dulungan Hornbill, or the Rufous-headed Hornbill. The province is also known as the province where the mountains meet the sea.
Besides environmental protection, what really drives Javie's mission? Does his connection to the land run deeper? And if so, how does it influence his work? This is the Crossroad Voices of Justice. I'm Juvenile Vitalis, and welcome to another episode of this series. In today's episode, we turn our attention to the Philippines, home to the critically endangered Dulungan, also known as the Rufous-headed Hornbill. This magnificent bird is a symbol of the rich biodiversity found within the archipelago, and a reminder of what's at stake as we confront the dual crisis of climate change and biodiversity loss. To learn more, I invited one of my friends, among many, Javie Barcinal, to tell me more about their work and how they're using community-led conservation to help tackle the loss of biodiversity in their hometown. The Central Panay Mountain Key Biodiversity Area in Panay Island is highly threatened and biodiverse. It's home to endangered wildlife, and only 80% of its original forest cover remains. Conservation efforts should prioritize the protection of this area, not only for the wildlife inhabitants, but also for the communities relying on it for their livelihood. The Dulungan, a critically endangered species among many, is also one of the species found on this threatened area.
Something that really came out of the grassroots initiatives that we've done for years is that the importance of grassroots involvement in terms of environmental justice and conservation. Because it's always about conversation that local people or frontline communities are always the helper from people from the outsider. It's always that people from the outside are always the ones trying to do the conservation work or trying to do the protection. It's always that local communities or people who has that direct connection with the local nature has always been undermined when it comes to their important role in terms of, the conservation and environmental justice movement. So it's really seeing that lack of opportunity and platform for local people, because I would say I had the privilege to really see the world outside from my home province, and I really saw the lack of equity in terms of platform and opportunity, because going to the cities in the Philippines, you see that most people from the rural area move to the city because there's more opportunities there, and it's always going back. They kind of forget, or they kind of, I would say, get disconnected with their roots. And I saw that opportunity also, and I saw that privilege and experience to somehow provide the opportunity and platform through Dulungan Youth here in my home province directly. And one of the main reasons why we founded Dulungan Youth back 2019 was to really create more avenues and platforms for young people to really leverage their motivation and their hopes in terms of the beauty of our nature here in our home province, and really be involved in terms of collective initiatives for environmental protection and environmental conservation. So it's really seeing the lack of opportunities and platforms here in our home province that really motivated me to pursue a more inclusive approach in conservation, that sometimes the sustainability part of conservation can become or can end if local conservation or local communities are not being involved. So I saw that as an opportunity to really provide more avenues to make conservation sustainable in our home province. That despite the lack of funding, or let's say the lack of external support, it's always that motivation for that to save our home province, because we have that direct connection. If we don't do the conservation work, mostly the mountains, the oceans that we grew up will just be degraded, and it's somehow connected with the memories of our childhood. So somehow I realized that conservation or the protection of our home province and its biodiversity is somehow interconnected also in terms of immortalizing our childhood, our good and bad memories from the past, and really trying to move forward in terms of making or creating more sustainable decisions and sustainable actions and initiatives here.
Can you share the core principles behind your approach to intersectional conservation?
Maybe one is really trying to make it inclusive with local communities. And it's really centered also in care and trust. Because I think with the climate and conservation movement right now, everything is already overwhelming. And especially in terms of the work that we do, in terms of environmental justice, the very core of the work is really in care and in trust. It's really caring more not only to the environment but also with the people that we are with in the movement and with the people that we work with, and also in terms of trust, because it's really a work of trust. Because if people don't trust you or doesn't have that kind of faith in the work that you do, it's just going to be an individual work. So it's really that inclusivity and also care and trust. That's the very core of the work that we do, especially in terms of building communities in the conservation work here in Antique.
How does Dulungan Youth and working with the community address the challenges posed by climate change?
Yeah, I think aside from the environmental issue that climate change is, affecting us, or it's also a socio-economic and political issue. Because if you've seen in terms of environmental work lately, it's always, the solutions or the projects are always coming from the outsiders. That's why we also want to mainstream a community-led initiative, because we believe that solutions are already there. And if we make it more inclusive for frontline communities, because local leadership is integral in terms on how we adapt in the current climate crisis and biodiversity crisis. For the very long time, local people and indigenous people have been displaced, have been framed as the villains, has been framed as the root causes of environmental problems at the grassroots level. But, working in the front lines and living in the front lines, I've seen that the best solution is to really involve communities, is to really have more locals at the front lines, more locals to speak up about what's happening here, more locals doing and deciding who or what is being protected in terms of the conservation work. So yeah, mostly seeing that kind of aspect in the climate justice and biodiversity work that really got me into a more humanizing approach in conservation. That, aside from this is a nature crisis, this is also a humanity crisis. It's an issue that a lot of people who experience it directly doesn't have the platform not only to speak up but also to do or to intervene. So that's why we're making the work here more inclusive, so that more people can build up not only their personal confidence, but to really build that intergenerational solidarity here at the grassroots level in Antique.
I know you mentioned something about inclusivity and community. And when we chatted last time, you said like the very core of community is not a blank word of just poor people. It's like the collective of where people belong, where we belong, and where we are part of something like a togetherness, as Dulungan means. So, why do you think that this approach is effective in your community's context?
Yeah, because I think, if you live in the rural area, And for the very long time, locals are always used to have that thinking of, a savior complex, advocates going in and out the communities. And I remember what I've said to you. This is a quote from a friend of a friend that said that community is not a blanket term for the poor people we work with, because that's not really the real meaning of community. Community means solidarity. It's a group of people that has that same characteristic or that same goal, especially in terms of the work that we do here in the biodiversity work. For me, I would describe Dulungan Youth as a community of young people who cares for the environment here in Antique. And for me, the term community has been so tainted by a lot of oppression and a lot of performative labels in terms of, how do I say it, in terms of like the current movements here. I mean, maybe not everyone in the movement, but there are people who just easily use the word community to benefit their social capital or to benefit their image. But for us, community is a sacred word. Community means something beyond the people we work with in the advocacy. For us, community is a word that shows strength and camaraderie in the work that we do, especially in conservation here in Antique. That's also one thing that we're trying to build, is to really build a bigger community, is to scale our current community in terms of Dulungan Youth. We want more people to care for the environment here and to really leverage that care into positive actions.
And so, when we speak about involving community and being inclusive, in what ways does intersectional community conservation contribute to climate justice?
I think being more inclusive when it comes to, you know, building like really that solid solidarity in the climate justice means that, or understanding that each one of us has that unique role in terms of the climate justice, in terms of the climate movement. For me, in terms of my perspective, it's really to organize and to campaign with local communities here in my home province. And there are people whose expertise are in the scientific side of conservation. And this has been also proven in the work that we do in Dulungan Youth. Some of the people that we work with in Dulungan Youth, some of our members has different backgrounds, are coming from different perspectives, they're coming from different walks and paths in life. And I think being more inclusive in terms of climate justice, it does highlight that each one of us has that specific role in the current collective initiatives that we're doing. And I believe that building a community highlights that each one of us shouldn't just have that same, how do I say it, has that same, let's say, physical strength or like character strength. I think that being inclusive means opening more possibilities to have different lenses, different ways of seeing and finding solutions, but at the same time having that same goal, which is, of course, to like really put equity and justice in the current climate movement, especially here in Antique.
How does your work engage with and potentially transform existing power dynamics within the community and broader social structures?
So currently, our goal is to really reclaim stewardship over the conservation of the biodiversity here. I wouldn't say that we're already there, but we're in that movement of like really seeing that big possibility and seeing it as a reality in the nearest future. That's why we're really very strong in terms of inclusivity and community led in our initiatives, because we want to make the paradigms becoming more open to those people who really experience the most drastic effects of the climate and nature crisis, those people who lives at the front lines. And we believe in the notion that those people who has that direct relationship or has that intimate relationship with the land or landscapes should be the ones deciding and protecting it. That's why we're very pushing a more community led initiative in terms of our work, because we believe that this is how we really solve the climate crisis through a bottom up approach. Solutions are localized, solutions are coming from the on grounds. And I believe that when we do it collectively, we can pressure, the current oppressive system. We can pressure those who continue to oppress us, especially the fossil fuel corporations that keeps on denying our call of a fossil free world. And I believe that we can do that through building more solidarity and camaraderie on the ground in our own communities, in our own localities, in our own home provinces.
What role do indigenous knowledge system and practices play in your conservation efforts?
Yeah, I think that we have a term traditional ecological knowledge or tech. And I believe that, for the very long time also, this wisdom has been labeled as primitive, or let's say not that technologically advanced anymore. But we have been proven wrong by the current crisis. We've seen how much the traditional ecological knowledge or the wisdom of indigenous people and local communities have been promoting a more harmonious lifestyle in terms of civilization and nature. For the one example is here in Antique, we have an indigenous people. They're called Iraynon Bukidnon. And one of their culture is that they're somehow semi-nomadic. So before, their livelihood is really in terms of foraging, agriculture. So in terms of agricultural technology, what they do before is that they move from place to place. After planting and after harvesting, they move to a different area. And that already is a sign of sustainable agriculture because they don't overuse the soil that they plant. They prioritize that this soil have the specific amount of time to regenerate its nutrients. So they move to a different area and do the planting there again. And then after harvesting, they do it in a different area again. And also in terms of cultural beliefs, traditional or like indigenous peoples and local communities here in Antique believes in the spirits of nature and they respect it. And for me, that's a sign of how much they value the local environment and how it influences their day-to-day living. And I think that wisdom is what we need right now, especially in terms of how we adapt with the current crisis and how we adapt with the fast changing climate. And that's been proven effective in terms of adaptation and climate mitigation.
And why is it critical, do you think, to integrate this into your project?
Yeah, because aside from that, going back to also the intersectionalities of the work that we do, because the conservation work that we do is not only the conservation or protection of the resources that the biodiversity provides, but also it means to conserve and protect these kind of cultures, this traditional ecological wisdom that's very embedded with the local biodiversity, with the local landscapes. So these work that we do also means that these culture, these knowledges can flourish in the future years or future generations, that younger people will know that their ancestors or the local communities or indigenous people has that kind of culture where they are directly connected or harmoniously live with the environment. So it's a holistic conservation. It's not only conserving the biodiversity for the sake of resources or for the sake of economic benefits, but it's also conserving the biodiversity because it's a means or a way of life of the people. It's their stories embedded in those landscapes. It's their memories embedded there. It's their culture. So I would really answer that in that way, that the work, the intersectionality of the work that we do is really holistic in terms of conservation.
It's often said that every small action counts. But what has been the most rewarding outcome of your conservation work so far?
I would really say that the most rewarding thing would really see the growth of the young people that we work with in Dulungan Youth. Most of them joined the organization at a young age of 14 years old, and now they're in college now, and I really saw that growth. I really saw the journey. I really saw from, from a shy little kid, they really blossomed. It's like I was there to see their journey of metamorphosis. And I would really say that's the most rewarding thing, aside from, the tangible impact or the direct impact of our initiatives in biodiversity conservation. And I really believe that we do this because it's also for the love and hope that we have for our generation, for our home province, and to really see that the work that we do is positively impacting the people being involved, not only in terms of leadership, but also in terms of their personal growth, is really rewarding for me. That this is just something beyond advocacy. This is a means of lifestyle and a means of really putting our hands in the pedestal in terms of how we want our future to be here in our home province.
And looking toward the future, how do you see your work evolving in response to the changing climate and environmental landscape?
Yes, honestly, we're still hopeful here in our home province. Our very goal is to really mainstream community led biodiversity conservation. And our vision is to really have more young people, local people, frontline communities to have at stake of their future in terms of decision making, in terms of their stories being put at the front lines of media platforms by them speaking up with their experience. And that's how I really see the conservation paradigms here in my home province, to make it more community centered, to make it more beneficial for those who are really experiencing it, and to make the paradigms of conservation become more equitable and become more regenerative in terms of integrating social and climate justice.
And can you share your thoughts on the importance of local leadership and involvement in achieving global climate goals?
As what I said earlier, the current solutions to the climate crisis also is should be or should come from the grassroots, or it's a bottom up approach. And local leadership is important in terms of representation, and at the same time the localization of solutions or approaches. These solutions can be effective for us, and these solutions can be not effective for other communities in, let's say, in other regions. or in other islands of the Philippines. But I think that's also the beauty of localization and the beauty of having different experience. It's because going back to what I said with defining community, having different people with different walks from different walks in life coming together for that one goal of really integrating justice in the climate, is that we also want different and diverse narratives to be put out there that makes the dots connected, and at the same time have that one powerful message that we need justice in terms of the current solutions of the climate crisis, and we need to make the perpetrators accountable for it. And local people, local leadership needs representation and platforms for that to be brought up in the top platforms. Our different experiences can become powerful, especially at the current experience or crisis we are experiencing right now.
How do you foster hope and resilience within the community, especially in the face of environmental crisis?
I think my hope is really rooted to that. Well, I would say that, seeing the effects and experiencing the effects of the climate crisis at the grassroots level, the hope is really coming from, seeing the people there in the movement and really learning more about, each other's stories and how we relate to each other and how we connect to each other, even though we're coming from different socioeconomic statuses. But at the end of the day, my hope is really coming from, those stories and real experiences from the grassroots. And I think it's the very human essence of these stories that there are good stories, there are bad stories, but at the same time, this is what makes us human, that whole life experience, that whole life journey. And my hope is really coming from those experiences, from those stories, from different individuals, from people that I know, from friends, from families, from colleagues. And I think, for the very long time, capitalist corporations wanted us to feel that we are an individual in this crisis, but that has been proven wrong by communities, by community building, by my experience in doing that. I really felt less lonely in the work that I do, in the work that we do. And for me, that hope is really coming from that community.
He acknowledges two major barriers to implementing effective community conservation: lack of resources and support from policies, and the misconception that communities are the root causes of environmental problems. He argues that these factors discourage communities from participating in conservation efforts despite their first-hand experience. As we look to the future, what message do you want to leave with those who are listening and want to make a difference?
Yeah, I think that, the experiences of young people can be so overwhelming. It's a whole lot of crisis. We even label it as the poly crisis, right? You have the economic insecurity happening, you have the climate crisis, you have the nature crisis. So everything can be overwhelming. And, that overwhelming feeling can sometimes hurdle us to do positive actions. But I think and I believe that we can start at small initiatives and really having or really investing in that care of wanting to do positive action. I started with that kind of feeling. And going back to what I've said earlier, we have our own unique roles, we have our own unique responsibilities in terms of the climate movement, but we must move forward also with accountability, that we need to also grow from our initiatives. Like, we must learn to grow also with what we do and how we see the current paradigms or approaches in trying to find justice in terms of the climate and biodiversity movement.
You have been listening to the Crossroad Voices of Justice, a podcast series on climate justice. I am Juvenal Vitalis, and that's the end of our episode. Check out the show notes for more information about this episode, as well as Javie and their work with the Dulungan Youth Organization. To learn more and get involved with the podcast, follow us on Instagram at the Unapologetic Human Pod. To learn more about CDKN, please visit cdkn.org. A special thanks goes out to the team at the Global Landscape Forum and everyone who made this podcast series possible. Music for this podcast was created by Blue Dot Sessions. This episode and the Crossroads series were made possible with the aid of a grant from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Netherlands and the International Development Research Centre, IDRC, Canada.